Before beginning the story, I'd like to say a big thank you for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading alternate history-related stories every single day. If that sounds good, be sure to leave a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a whole lot when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. I remember December 21st, 2012, like it was yesterday. Everyone does, even if they pretend they don't. The whole world was talking about it for months leading up to that date. The Mayan apocalypse, the end of the calendar, the day everything was supposed to come crashing down around us. People threw end-of-the-world parties. Doomsday preppers stocked their bunkers with canned goods and ammunition. News anchors made jokes about it while showing footage of ancient temples and interviewing scholars who kept trying to explain that everyone was misinterpreting the whole thing. Then December 22nd came, and nothing had happened. The sun rose. People went to work. The world kept spinning. Everyone laughed it off and moved on with their lives, embarrassed that they'd ever taken it seriously. My name is Caleb Dunne. I'm 41 years old, and I've been working as an HVAC technician in Bakersfield, California, for the past 18 years. I fix air conditioners and heating systems. I crawl through attics and basements. I'm nobody special, but I've realized something over the past few years that keeps me awake at night. Something that I can't shake no matter how hard I try. Something did happen on December 21st, 2012. Something changed. We just didn't notice because we were looking for fire and brimstone, for earthquakes and floods, for the dramatic end of everything. We should have been paying attention to something far more subtle. The world didn't end that day, but something that had been protecting us did. I've been in thousands of homes over my 18 years in this business. Apartments, houses, office buildings, warehouses. When you work in HVAC, you see how people really live. You see the parts of their homes they don't show to guess. You learn to read spaces, to understand how air moves through a building, where the cold spots are and why. That's why I started noticing things that didn't add up. It began maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I'd get service calls from families complaining about certain rooms feeling wrong. Not just uncomfortable, wrong. They'd describe a heaviness in the air, a feeling of being watched. They'd tell me their pets refused to enter specific areas. Dogs that would bark at empty corners for hours. Cats that would hiss at nothing and then bolt from the room like something was chasing them. And the kids. God, the kids were the worst part. Parents would mention, almost as an afterthought, that their children had started talking about people who weren't there. The man who stands in the corner of my bedroom, the lady who watches me from the closet, the tall thing that sits at the foot of my bed at night. I used to dismiss it. Old houses settle. Kids have wild imaginations. Pets are strange creatures with senses we don't fully understand. There was always a rational explanation. But the calls kept increasing, and the complaints kept getting worse. Last month, I took a service call at a house in one of those new subdivisions they built on the east side of town. Nice family, the Hendersons. Young couple with 2 kids. They wanted me to check their ventilation because certain rooms were always cold, no matter what they set the thermostat to. I checked everything. The system was working perfectly. No leaks in the ductwork, no blockages. No issues with insulation. Nothing that would explain the temperature problems. But I felt it too. There was a coldness in the upstairs hallway that had nothing to do with air conditioning. It wasn't a draft. It wasn't poor circulation. It was something else entirely. A chill that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The Hendersons' 8-year-old daughter, Lily, followed me around while I worked. She seemed fascinated by my tools, asking questions about what everything did. Then, while I was checking the vent in her bedroom, she tugged on my sleeve. "Can you see him?" she asked. I asked her what she meant. She pointed to the corner of her room, near the window. "The tall man. He's always standing there. Mummy and Daddy can't see him, but I thought maybe you could." I looked where she was pointing. There was nothing there, just an empty corner with pink wallpaper and a stuffed animal on the floor. But my skin prickled. Every hair on my arm stood up, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from exactly where she was pointing. I left that house faster than I should have. I told the Hendersons there was nothing wrong with their system. I didn't know what else to say. It wasn't just the service calls. I started experiencing things myself. Shadows that moved wrong in my peripheral vision. I'd catch something shifting in the corner of my eye. But when I turned to look, everything was still. At first, I thought it was just fatigue. Eye strain from staring at ductwork in dark attics. Then came the feeling of being watched. It would hit me at random times, sitting on my couch, watching television, lying in bed at night trying to fall asleep, standing in my kitchen making coffee in the morning. That unmistakable sensation of eyes on my back, even when I was completely alone. I started dreaming too, strange dreams that I couldn't quite remember when I woke up, but that left me feeling small and exposed. Dreams of standing in vast empty spaces while something enormous passed overhead, so large that I could only perceive a fraction of it, like an ant trying to comprehend a skyscraper. I told my ex-wife about it during one of our rare phone calls. She said it sounded like a midlife crisis. Maybe I needed a hobby. Maybe I needed therapy. I went to my doctor. He ran some tests, asked about my stress levels, and told me I probably had anxiety. He offered to prescribe medication. I declined because deep down I knew what was happening to me wasn't anxiety. It wasn't a midlife crisis. It wasn't my imagination. It was the truth, finally catching up with me. I met Dara at a job site about 2 months ago. She was an electrician working on the same commercial building I was servicing, an old office complex downtown that was being renovated. We kept running into each other in the hallways and stairwells, and eventually we started talking during lunch breaks. Dara Okonkwo was in her late 30s, practical and no-nonsense in a way that reminded me of myself. She'd been doing electrical work for 15 years and had seen just about everything that could go wrong in a building. It was during our third or fourth conversation that she said something that made my blood run cold. "You feel it too, don't you?" she asked. I didn't have to ask what she meant. I just nodded. She told me about her experiences, the watched feeling, the shadows that moved on their own, the dreams of impossible vastness. She'd been dealing with it for years, longer than me. But instead of trying to ignore it or explain it away, she'd been paying attention. Everyone I've talked to who experiences these things has one thing in common, she said. They all remember December 21st, 2012. Not just casually, they remember it vividly, like it was burned into their minds. I thought back to that date. I remembered exactly where I was, what I was doing, what the weather was like. It was strange how clear the memory was, considering nothing significant had happened to me personally that day. Dara had found others online, hundreds of them, all experiencing the same phenomena, the same watched feeling, the same cold spots, the same shadows, the same dreams. They called themselves the aware because they could perceive things that others couldn't. I don't know what changed that day, Dara said, but something did. Something that affected certain people and not others, like a frequency that only some of us can hear. She believed that whatever we were perceiving had always been here. We just couldn't see it before. I wanted to dismiss it as conspiracy theory nonsense, the kind of thing you'd find on late-night internet rabbit holes alongside flat earth theories and lizard people. But I couldn't explain away my own experiences, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Dara was onto something. She invited me to meet with some of the others she'd connected with. Maybe together we could figure out what was happening. I said yes. We met at a diner outside of town on a Tuesday evening, the kind of place with sticky vinyl booths and coffee that had been sitting on the burner for too long. Dara and I arrived first, and the others filtered in over the next half hour. Emmett Crane was a former construction foreman in his 60s. Big man, calloused hands, the kind of guy who'd spent his whole life working with his body. He'd had to retire early, he told us, because he couldn't stop seeing things on job sites. Figures standing in unfinished rooms, shapes in the shadows of basements. It had gotten to the point where he couldn't function. Nina Vasquez was a night shift nurse at one of the local hospitals. She'd started perceiving what she called extra people in patient rooms. Figures that weren't patients, weren't staff, weren't visitors, just standing there, watching. She'd initially thought she was hallucinating from exhaustion. Now she wasn't so sure. Franklin Webb was the youngest of us, only in his mid-20s. He worked at a warehouse on the edge of town and had been aware, as he put it, since he was a teenager. Each of them described similar phenomena, shadows that moved independently of any light source, cold spots that appeared in random locations with no explanation, the constant feeling of being watched by something that existed just outside their field of vision, and the dreams. We all had the dreams. Franklin's story was different from the rest of ours, though. He was only 12 years old on December 21st, 2012. I was homesick from school that day, he said. Flu or something. I was lying in bed with a fever, drifting in and out of sleep. And then, at exactly 4:30 in the afternoon, I felt something change. He struggled to describe it. Like pressure releasing, he said. Like a door opening somewhere deep inside his head. A pop, and then silence. When he opened his eyes, he could see them for the first time. Figures standing in the corners of his bedroom. Tall, thin, wrong in ways he couldn't articulate. They hadn't been there before, or maybe they had, and he just couldn't see them. They'd never gone away. I've lived with them for 13 years, Franklin said. You get used to it, sort of. You learn not to look directly at them. You learn to pretend they're not there. He paused. But they're getting harder to ignore. There are more of them now. And they're getting bolder. We spent hours at that diner, piecing together a theory from the fragments we each carried. Dara had a contact who worked at the university library, someone who could access archives and historical records. Through her, we'd gathered information about what might have actually happened on December 21st, 2012. The Mayan calendar wasn't predicting the end of the world. Scholars had been saying that for years. It was predicting the end of a cycle, a transition from one age to another. But what the popular interpretations missed, what everyone overlooked in their rush to make apocalypse movies and sell survival gear, was what the cycle was supposed to represent. Ancient texts from cultures all over the world describe a time when humanity lived alongside other beings. Not gods exactly, not spirits, something else. Entities that existed in the spaces between things, in shadows, in cold corners, in the edges of perception. The Mayans wrote about them. So did the Egyptians, the Sumerians, cultures that had no contact with each other, all describing the same thing. Something happened thousands of years ago that pushed these entities out of human perception. A barrier was created, a veil between what humans could see and what actually existed alongside them. The Mayan calendar wasn't counting down to destruction. It was counting down to the end of the barrier's effectiveness, the end of the cycle of protection. The ancient texts had different names for the entities. Some called them Watchers. Others called them the Hungry Ones. Others simply called them the Others. They weren't ghosts. They weren't demons in the religious sense. They were something entirely outside human categories. They existed before humanity. They would exist long after humanity was gone. And for thousands of years, they had been waiting for the barrier to fall, watching us through the cracks, growing stronger as the veil weakened, patient because time meant nothing to them. The barrier isn't just weakening, Dara said. It's almost gone. She'd done the math, tracked the rate of increase in aware individuals, mapped the intensity of phenomena over time. At the rate things were accelerating, within a few years, maybe less, everyone would be able to see them. And once everyone could see them, they wouldn't need to hide anymore. I went home that night with my head spinning. Part of me still wanted to dismiss everything as collective delusion, mass hysteria, a shared mental breakdown among people who were predisposed to see patterns that weren't there. But I couldn't deny my own experiences, the things I'd seen, the things I'd felt. Everything the others described matched what I'd been living with for years. My apartment felt wrong when I walked through the door. The air was cold, much colder than it should have been. The thermostat said 72 degrees, but it felt like 50. I could see my breath misting in front of my face. The shadows in the corners of my living room seemed deeper than usual, darker, like the darkness had weight and substance. And for the first time, I didn't just feel watched. I could see what was watching me. It stood in the corner near my television, tall, so tall that its head nearly brushed the 8-foot ceiling, thin, like something that had been stretched beyond its natural proportions. I couldn't make out features. It was like looking at a shape cut out of reality itself, a hole in the world, in the vague outline of something that might have once been human shape. If you squinted, if you didn't look too closely, it didn't move. It just watched. I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at me to get out of there, to flee, to put as much distance between myself and that thing as possible. But my legs wouldn't move. My body had locked up completely. The entity didn't speak, but I felt something pressing against my mind. Not words, nothing as simple as language, just impressions, feelings, images, ancient and cold and utterly alien. It was curious about me, about all of us, the ones who could see. It had been watching humanity for so long, waiting for this moment, waiting for the barrier to fall. And now that the veil was failing, it wanted me to understand something. The impression that flooded my mind was simple and more terrifying than anything I'd ever experienced. The entities weren't evil. They weren't malevolent. They didn't hate humanity. They simply didn't care about humanity at all. We were irrelevant to them, like insects, like bacteria, beneath notice. They had been waiting to reclaim the spaces they once occupied, the shadows, the corners, the cold places. Those spaces belonged to them, had always belonged to them. The barrier had pushed them out, forced them to exist at the edges of perception. Now that the barrier was failing, they were simply coming home. Not out of cruelty, not out of malice, just because those spaces were theirs. Humanity would have to adapt to sharing reality with things that had no interest in whether we survived or not. The impression faded. The presence withdrew. I collapsed onto my floor and didn't move until morning. I called Dara as soon as the sun came up. She wasn't surprised by what I told her. The same thing had happened to Emmett the night before, and Nina. "It's accelerating," she said, "faster than I predicted." Over the following weeks, reports flooded in from aware individuals all over the country. More sightings, more encounters, more people becoming aware every single day. The barrier was collapsing faster now, like a dam that had held for thousands of years finally giving way. News reports started picking up strange stories, mass sightings in cities, unexplained phenomena that couldn't be easily dismissed. Children across the country describing the same things, the same tall figures, the same watchers in the corners of their bedrooms. The authorities dismissed it as hysteria, mass delusion, some new form of social media-driven panic. But the aware knew better. Social media exploded with videos and photographs. Most were fake, obviously, hoaxes and misidentifications and people chasing attention. But some of them were real. I could tell. After years of living with this, you develop an eye for what's genuine. People who had never been aware before were starting to see things. The veil was thinning for everyone, not just those of us who had been sensitive from the beginning. Children were the most affected. Their minds hadn't been trained to filter out the impossible. They saw what was really there, while adults struggled to rationalize it away. Parents flooded pediatricians and therapists with concerns about their kids. Night terrors, they called it. Overactive imaginations. The medical establishment had no explanation, so they fell back on the familiar. But everyone knew something was different. Something had changed. The world felt wrong in a way that nobody could quite articulate. Our group met again a few weeks later. We looked like survivors of some disaster that hadn't been officially acknowledged yet. Franklin hadn't slept in days. Dark circles under his eyes, hands trembling around his coffee cup. He said they were everywhere now, In every shadow, in every corner, every time he closed his eyes, he saw them. Nina had quit her job at the hospital. She couldn't handle it anymore, seeing entities standing over patients' beds, watching people die while those things just observed, utterly indifferent, like scientists studying lab specimens. Emmett was calm, almost resigned. He said he'd made peace with it. What was the point of fighting? The barrier was going to fall no matter what we did. All we could control was how we responded. Dara was still determined, still searching for some way to restore the barrier, or at least slow its collapse. She'd reached out to researchers, academics, anyone who might have answers. But I knew the truth. We all did, even if some of us weren't ready to admit it. There was no stopping this. There never was. The barrier hadn't been built by humans. We didn't understand how it worked or what had created it. We just benefited from its protection without ever knowing it existed. And now that protection was ending, and there was nothing any of us could do about it. Months passed. The barrier continued to fail. The percentage of people who could see them grew steadily. First, it was just those of us who had been sensitive from the start. Then it was people with traumatic histories, people who had experienced altered states of consciousness. Then it was children. Then it was everyone. By the 1-year anniversary of my encounter in my living room, estimates suggested that at least 30% of the population could perceive the entities. By now, I imagine it's higher, maybe much higher. They're everywhere now. You see them in homes, standing motionless in corners, in offices, watching workers type at their computers, in schools, present in every classroom, on streets, occupying the shadows between streetlights. They still don't interact with humans directly, not in any way that matters. They just watch. They just exist. But their presence is changing everything. Some people couldn't handle it. The suicide rate increased significantly in the first year. Mental health services were overwhelmed. Some people simply shut down, retreating into themselves, refusing to acknowledge what they were seeing. Others adapted slowly and painfully, learning to live alongside things they couldn't understand. Humans are resilient that way. We've survived ice ages and plagues and wars. We can survive this too. New religions sprang up almost overnight. Some worship the entities. Others try to appease them. Others claim they're angels or demons or spirits of the dead. Everyone looking for meaning in something that has no interest in providing it. Governments issued official statements acknowledging the phenomena while offering no explanation. Scientists study the entities but can't explain what they are, where they came from, or what they want. The best minds in the world, and they're just as lost as the rest of us. The world keeps turning. People still go to work. Bills still need to be paid. Life continues, even when life no longer makes sense. I still work in HVAC. People still need their air conditioners fixed. Their furnaces still break down in the middle of winter. The practical necessities of life don't stop just because reality isn't what we thought it was. But my service calls are different now. Customers ask new questions. How many of them are in my house? They want to know. Are there more in certain rooms? Is there anything I can do to make them leave? I don't have good answers. Nobody does. I've learned to work around them, to ignore the tall figures standing in corners while I check ductwork and replace filters. It's not easy. It will never be easy. The wrongness of them never fades, no matter how many times you encounter them. but it's survivable. That's the best I can say. Humanity is learning to share its world with things that were here long before us. Things that don't care if we live or die. Things that see us the way we might see ants building a hill in our backyard. Occasionally interesting, but ultimately irrelevant. Some days, that indifference is the hardest part. I think I could handle malevolence. I could understand hatred. Those are human things, things I could fight against. But how do you fight something that doesn't even acknowledge your existence? How do you matter to something that has watched civilizations rise and fall for millions of years? You don't. You just learn to live with it. I think about December 21st, 2012, a lot these days. I remember how worried everyone was, how certain that the world was going to end in fire and destruction. How relieved everyone felt when December 22nd came and nothing had happened. We never considered that the apocalypse might be quieter than that. The world didn't end, it just changed. Something that had been protecting humanity for thousands of years stopped working, and now we have to live with the consequences. The Mayans weren't wrong. Something did end that day, just not the thing we expected. The barrier fell, the veil lifted, and everything that had been hidden in the spaces between things came back into view. If you're reading this and you've started feeling watched lately, I need you to listen. If shadows seem darker than they should be, if certain rooms in your house feel cold for no reason, if you've caught something moving in your peripheral vision that wasn't there when you looked directly at it, then you're becoming aware, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. The barrier is almost gone now. It's only a matter of time before everyone can see what some of us have been seeing for years. The entities aren't going away. They're not leaving. This world is their home as much as it is ours. Maybe more, considering they were here first. They don't want to hurt us. They don't want anything from us at all. We simply don't matter to them. And somehow, that's worse than if they were monsters trying to destroy us. At least monsters acknowledge that you exist. At least monsters see you as something worth destroying. The Watchers don't even give us that. The Mayans weren't wrong about December 21st, 2012. Something did end that day. The illusion that we were alone. The comfort of believing that what we could see was all there was. The protection we never knew we had. The world didn't end, but the world we thought we knew did. Something changed on December 21st, 2012, and we're only just beginning to understand what we lost.